My name is Amelia. I am 32 years old, and I never imagined my life would unravel in a single phone call. It was a late Friday evening. I had just returned from court, exhausted after representing a family fighting foreclosure. My phone buzzed on the table, the caller ID flashing my mother's name. I almost ignored it. Something told me to let it ring, but habit and obligation made me answer. Her words hit like a blade. You have 48 hours to collect your things. That house belongs to your sister now. For a moment, I could not breathe. The Victorian home my grandmother left to me in her will, the only true place that had ever felt like home, was being stripped away with a single sentence. My mother's tone was cold, matter of fact, as if she were discussing a business transaction rather than dismantling my world. I froze, the silence on my end mistaken for compliance. "Do not argue," she snapped. "It is already decided. Stephanie needs the house more than you do." Then the line went dead. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, my case files stacked around me like soldiers waiting for orders. For years I had fought battles in courtrooms for clients who had nowhere else to turn. Now I was the one staring at the edge of eviction, not by law, but by blood. The irony made my stomach twist. The house was more than bricks and beams. Built in 1920, with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, it had sheltered generations of my family. It held the echoes of my grandmother Elaine's laughter, the scent of apple pie drifting through the halls, the creak of the staircase where I slid down as a child. It was my anchor, my sanctuary, and my inheritance. And yet, my parents had reduced it to a bargaining chip. My mind raced. Could they actually do this? The will had been clear. The deed had my name. But still, their authority pressed against me like a weight I had carried since childhood. Their voices had always been louder than mine, their decisions final. Not this time. As the shock gave way to anger, a new thought ignited. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was not the timid girl who once begged for their approval. I was a seasoned attorney, a woman who had built her life on protecting others from unlawful eviction and manipulation. And if I could do it for strangers, I could damn well do it for myself. I rose from the couch, pacing my small living room, adrenaline flooding my veins. My grandmother's words echoed in my memory. A woman must know how to take care of herself. She had prepared me for this moment long before she knew it would come. The clock was ticking. 48 hours. But they would soon learn that I was not about to walk away quietly. When the shock faded, a slow burn settled inside me. I remember staring at my phone, the screen still lit with the last call, my mother's clipped words echoing in my ears. 48 hours. As if my life, my memories, and my grandmother's legacy could be boxed up and erased in 2 days. But before I dive deeper into this storm, let me pause for a second. If you have ever faced betrayal that shook you to your core, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you want to follow how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter. Sometimes the only way to survive darkness is to share it, to remind yourself you are not alone. I had always been the outsider in my family. My parents valued appearances, wealth, and the approval of their social circle. To them, everything had a price tag. To me, some things were sacred. My grandmother's house was not just real estate. It was the one place where I had been seen, loved, and encouraged without condition. As I stood in my apartment that night, I thought about how much of myself was woven into that old Victorian. The porch I painted with my grandmother at 12, the banister I used to slide down when I was small, the garden where we planted flowers side by side. It was more than nostalgia. It was proof that I belonged somewhere, even when my parents made me feel like I did not. Their phone call was not only about a house, it was about power. It was a reminder of the old family script where Stephanie, the golden child, could do no wrong, and I, the inconvenient daughter, was always expected to step aside. My sister had chosen the path my parents laid out for her business school, the approved husband, the curated life. I had chosen my own way. That was my crime. Now they were using her divorce as leverage, demanding I surrender the one gift my grandmother had left me. I could feel the manipulation dripping through every word. Your sister has a child. She needs this more than you. Family helps family. Their version of family had always meant one thing: sacrifice yourself to keep the golden child comfortable. I could not sleep that night. I paced my small apartment, case files forgotten, the weight of years pressing on me. Memories of holidays where my achievements were brushed aside in favor of Stephanie's bigger milestones. Graduation ceremonies where my parents left early for a business dinner. Phone calls filled with criticism disguised as advice. But alongside the pain, I remembered something else. The nights I spent in my grandmother's sunroom, the one she had turned into a study just for me when I was preparing for law school. She would sit nearby with her knitting, her quiet presence telling me that she believed in me, that I was enough. Her faith had carried me through the hardest exams and the longest nights. And now, I realized, it would carry me through this. I told myself again and again, I am not powerless. I am not a scared child anymore. I am an attorney. I know the law. I know my rights. And most of all, I know my grandmother's wishes. That thought steadied me. I decided right then that I would fight. Not out of spite, not even out of anger, but out of respect for myself, for my grandmother, and for the truth. This was no longer just about a house. It was about drawing a line that should have been drawn years ago. A line that said, you cannot diminish me, you cannot rewrite reality, and you cannot take what is rightfully mine. So while the night stretched long and the city outside my window went quiet, I began planning. I did not know all the steps yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not let them win. The countdown had begun. 48 hours. And this time, the story would not end with me backing down. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had never come, not after that call. Instead, my mind replayed every memory tied to that house, each one sharper in the quiet hours of the night. So I got into my car and drove through the still streets of Boston toward the suburbs, toward the Victorian home that had anchored my childhood. When I pulled into the driveway, the early light fell across its weathered blue shutters and wide wraparound porch. The house seemed to breathe, solid and steady, as if it were waiting for me. This was not just a building. It was the keeper of my story, the witness to my grandmother's love. The wooden steps creaked as I climbed them. My hand brushed the rail, remembering how I had once stood beside my grandmother with a paintbrush in hand, both of us spattered in blue paint, laughing until our stomachs hurt. She wanted me to know that care was not about money but about presence. That day she said, when you love something, you give it your time, not just your wallet. Those words had shaped me more than any lecture my parents ever gave. Inside, the scent was faint but familiar. Old wood, a trace of lavender, maybe even the ghost of apple pie. My grandmother used to fill this kitchen with its warm sweetness. I walked to the bay window that overlooked the garden. The soil was dark, waiting for spring to bring back the peonies we planted together. Every year, they returned, no matter the storms of winter. She used to say, life comes back sure. Give it the right conditions, and it will bloom again. That lesson had carried me through law school, heartbreaks, and now, this betrayal. The grand staircase loomed, the one I used to slide down as a child, reckless and free. My parents had scolded me, but my grandmother only laughed, telling me not to lose that joy. Her laughter still echoed faintly in my memory, filling the house with life. Every corner held a piece of her. The sunroom she transformed into my study space, with plants she tended so I would never feel alone while I read case law late into the night. The garden shed where she taught me to use tools, her hands rough but gentle as she guided mine. The living room where she quilted by the fire, telling me stories of strong women in our family. This house was not just shelter, it was a testament, a legacy passed down with intention, not accident. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she left it to me. She wanted me to have more than bricks and beams. She wanted me to have a place where I could always return to myself. Standing there, I felt both stronger and sadder. Stronger because I knew I had roots here, deeper than my parents' shallow definition of value. Sadder because those same parents saw none of it. To them, it was just a house. something that could be liquidated, traded, reassigned like stock. They had missed the soul of it entirely. I walked room to room, touching walls, opening doors, letting the memories steady me. The dining room still held the table where I had done homework while my grandmother cooked. The china cabinet still guarded her delicate glass collection, each piece explained to me with care. How could anyone say this was empty, unused, wasted? To me, it was alive. As the morning sun rose higher, I sat on the porch swing. The chains groaned with a sound that once lulled me to sleep on hot summer afternoons. I let the rhythm steady my racing thoughts. I realized then that defending this house was not optional. It was my duty to my grandmother, to myself, to the part of me that had always been told I was less than my sister. My parents might believe they could bully me into submission. My sister might believe entitlement was enough to rewrite a will. But I knew the truth, and the house itself reminded me. It was mine. It had always been mine. And no matter what storm was coming, I would fight for it with everything I had. I can still see her hands weathered, lined, but steady as stone. My grandmother Elaine believed a girl should never wait for someone else to rescue her. A woman must know how to take care of herself. She told me again and again. Those words were not just advice, they were marching orders. By the time I was 15, under her watchful eyes, I could patch drywall, change a tire on the side of the road, and cook a Thanksgiving dinner from scratch. While other kids my age spent weekends at the mall, I spent mine bent over garden soil, learning the difference between annuals and perennials. She told me, life comes back if you give it the right conditions. She wasn't just talking about flowers, she was teaching me resilience. I remember kneeling beside her in the dirt, our knees stained, the smell of earth thick in the air. She explained how roots stretch unseen, how strength is often hidden underground. She wanted me to understand that strength could look quiet, but it held everything together. I carry that lesson now in the marrow of my bones. There were nights she pulled me into the kitchen to show me how to fix a leaking faucet. At first my hands fumbled with the tools, the wrench too heavy, the pipe slick. But her voice guided me, patient, steady. Don't be afraid of mistakes. They are proof you're learning. I tightened the fitting, water stopped dripping, and she smiled like I had just won a war. My parents never celebrated my victories like that. To them, skills like fixing pipes or changing tires were beneath us, not worthy of applause. But to my grandmother they were the foundation of independence. She knew life would test me, and she was determined I would not break. She also gave me space to dream. When I got into law school, she converted the sunroom into a study. She filled it with plants, their green leaves crowding the windows, sunlight spilling across my desk. I studied for the bar surrounded by life, and in that room, I never felt alone. She would sit nearby, knitting or reading, her presence a constant reassurance. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at her, and I believed again. That was the difference. My grandmother saw me not as a reflection of herself, not as a pawn to polish the family image, but as a person. She told me I was strong. She told me I was worthy. And when I succeeded, she celebrated without hesitation. When I failed, she reminded me that failure was not final. All those lessons became armor. I carried them into courtrooms, into long nights of study, into moments like this standing against my own family. They had always tried to make me small, to press me into silence. But my grandmother had already taught me how to take up space, how to plant my roots, and refuse to be moved. Sitting in her house that morning, I could almost hear her voice whispering through the walls. Stand your ground, Amelia. Never let anyone diminish your light. It wasn't just memory, it was command. I realized something then. Every tool she put in my hands, every plant she made me nurture, every word of faith she gave me was preparing me for this exact battle. She knew life would be unfair. She knew family could wound as deeply as strangers. She armed me not with money or status but with resilience. And now, when my parents thought they could bully me out of what was mine, I felt her training rise inside me like a shield. Her love had not only raised me, it had built me. And I promised myself I would honor that love, Not just by keeping the house, but by standing unshaken in the storm that was about to break. My parents had a different vision of success. To them, life was a ladder made of promotions, possessions, and the right country club memberships. My mother, with her flawless hair and carefully curated social calendar, had mapped my path before I could even walk. My father, distant and stern, approached parenting like a business transaction. Results mattered, not feelings. When I told them I wanted to practice public service law, they acted as if I had announced I was throwing my education in the trash. "All that money wasted," my mother muttered. My father barely looked up from his briefcase. They wanted me in corporate law, where profit was king, where my work would boost their bragging rights at cocktail parties. And then there was Stephanie. My younger sister had always been eager to follow the script. She went to the business school they selected, married the man they approved, and never challenged their authority. To my parents, she was the daughter they could point to with pride. The golden child. The safe investment. I was the contrast. Independent, unpredictable, unwilling to bend. Which, in their eyes, made me difficult. My achievements, graduating with honors, winning housing rights cases for vulnerable families, were brushed aside as small time. When Stephanie helped secure a corporate merger, my father toasted her at dinner. When I prevented elderly tenants from being evicted, he shook his head and asked why I was wasting my potential. Year after year, the divide grew wider. Holiday gatherings turned into silent battles, where I swallowed every bitter comment. Family dinners ended with me leaving early, fighting back tears while Stephanie basked in approval. It hurt, of course it did. No matter how much I told myself I didn't care, a part of me still longed for their acknowledgement. But every time I reached for it, they pushed me further away. And every time they diminished me, my grandmother's voice rose louder in my heart, telling me I was enough. Now, as I sat in her house, replaying my mother's cruel ultimatum, I realized something important. This was not just about a property. It was about a lifelong pattern of dismissal. They had always expected me to step aside, to sacrifice my worth so Stephanie could shine brighter. But not this time. Not when the house symbolized the only place I had ever been celebrated simply for being myself. I knew my parents would try to frame me as selfish. They always did. They would say I was choosing bricks and mortar over family. They would twist every word until I looked like the villain. But deep down, I understood something they never would. Love cannot be bought, and legacy cannot be reassigned by decree. For once, I felt clarity. The scales had fallen from my eyes. My parents' approval was not a prize worth chasing, because it had always come at the cost of my dignity. Still, a small voice inside me wondered, what would you do in my shoes? Would you cave to keep the peace, or would you fight for what was right, even if it meant standing alone? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if your own parents ordered you to give away something that was legally and rightfully yours? I want to know how you would face that moment, because for me, it became the turning point. The truth was clear. My parents saw me as an obstacle. My sister saw me as a resource. And I had to decide whether I would keep playing that role or finally step into the power my grandmother had given me. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. The house was silent, but in the silence, I heard my grandmother's laughter, her words, her love. That was my answer. I would not give in. I would not surrender what was mine. And I would not let their manipulation define me anymore. I still remember the day my grandmother's will was read. 3 years ago, I sat in a quiet attorney's office with my parents and Stephanie. The grief of losing her pressed on me like a weight, but there was also a flicker of gratitude. She had thought ahead, made her intentions clear, and left no room for confusion. The lawyer opened the envelope and began reading. My grandmother had been meticulous. Every clause, every sentence was precise. When he reached the part about the house, my heart pounded. She had left it to me unconditionally. I glanced at my parents then. Their faces tightened, masks cracking for a second before they regained composure. Stephanie shifted in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. The room grew heavy with unspoken resentment. But the papers were there, stamped and signed, unshakable. The house was mine. Along with the deed came a letter, written in her careful handwriting. I keep it in my desk drawer even now. This house has sheltered 4 generations of strong women, she wrote. Now it will shelter you, my dear. May it always remind you of your strength and help you forge your own path. Her words brought tears then, and they still do now. She had seen me, really seen me in ways my parents never had. That house wasn't just inheritance. It was her final embrace, a shield she placed in my hands, so I would never be without a safe place. Of course, my parents were far from pleased. I remember the sharp look my mother gave me as we left the office. "It's just a house," she said flatly, as if trying to strip it of meaning. My father said nothing, but the silence spoke louder than any words. Even then, I felt the storm brewing beneath the surface. Still, I believed the matter was settled. The documents were ironclad. My grandmother had consulted her attorney and left no loopholes. She made sure no one could undo her wishes. For a time I felt secure in that knowledge. I didn't move into the house right away. My career in Boston demanded long hours, and the commute would have been brutal. But I cared for it, maintained it, paid the taxes, visited regularly. I kept it alive, not just as property, but as a piece of her spirit. I told myself that one day, maybe when I had a family of my own, I would move in permanently. Developers made offers. Tempting numbers that could have wiped out my student loans in an instant. I turned them all down. Because to me, the house was priceless. How do you assign value to the smell of apple pie in the kitchen, the feel of your grandmother's quilt across your shoulders, the sight of peonies blooming in the garden each spring? You don't. You hold on. My parents never understood. You could sell it and buy something more practical, my mother would say. It's just sitting there. She never grasped that it wasn't about practicality. It was about memory, love, legacy. To her and my father, everything was a transaction. To me, this house was sacred. Now, sitting in that same living room with their threat echoing in my head, I realized they had never stopped plotting. They had tolerated my ownership only until it suited them to take it back. Stephanie's divorce was just an excuse. A cover for a plan they'd probably been considering since the will was first read. But they underestimated me. They thought I would crumble under pressure. That old habits of obedience would resurface. They thought wrong. This house was my grandmother's gift. And I would defend it with the same strength she had instilled in me all those years. The will was clear. The house was mine. And no manipulation could erase that truth. It was a Friday evening when the blow finally landed. I had just stepped into my apartment, weary from a week of court hearings. My bag slid from my shoulder onto the couch, heels kicked aside, when my phone rang. My mother's name glowed on the screen. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But some sense of obligation made me swipe to answer. "Cher, we need to discuss the house," she began, her voice clipped, businesslike. That tone always meant decisions had been made, and my input was only a formality. I sat down slowly, dread coiling in my stomach. "What about it? Your sister needs a place to live. The divorce is final. She can't afford their house. Your father and I have decided she and Amanda will move into your grandmother's house." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. My pulse hammered as I shot upright. "What do you mean you've decided? That house belongs to me. Grandma left it to me." "Don't be difficult, Cher," my mother snapped. "You don't even live there. It's sitting empty while your sister and niece have nowhere to go. Family helps family." I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I pay the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. I have every right to keep it. Stephanie can look for apartments. Downsizing is an option. She doesn't get to take my house." "You're always so selfish," she shrilled. "Stephanie has a child to think of. What do you have? A career that keeps you too busy to even use the house? We aren't asking, Cher. We're telling you. 48 hours to get your things out. After that, Stephanie moves in." I heard my father's voice then, firm and cold, cutting through the line. "This isn't up for debate. The decision has been made. Your sister needs that house more than you do. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I felt my breath catch, my body trembling with anger. "You can't just give away my property. This isn't legal." "We can and we have," my father replied. "Martin is drawing up the papers now. If you fight this, you'll only hurt your sister and her daughter. Do you really want to deprive a child of a stable home because you're clinging to sentiment?" His words sliced deep, crafted with precision to guilt me into surrender. But even through the sting, I knew the truth. This wasn't about family. This was about control. It always had been. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. Almost immediately, a text buzzed through. "Stephanie, I know this is hard for you, but I really need this right now. Amanda and I have nowhere else to go. Mom and Dad said you never use the house anyway. I promise we'll take good care of it. We can even help you move your things this weekend." The entitlement dripped off the screen. My blood boiled. They had already decided, already written me out, as if my voice didn't matter. As if my grandmother's will could be erased with one family decree. But this time, I refused to be silenced. I was not the timid girl they remembered. I was a lawyer who specialized in housing rights. If anyone knew how to protect property, it was me. The clock was ticking. 48 hours. But while they thought they had trapped me, they had no idea what I was capable of. Because the next moves would not come from desperation. They would come from strategy. And if you think you know how this ends, you might be surprised. Stay with me, because the moment my family tried to cross that line, they set off a chain of events none of them could have predicted. After the call ended, I just sat there in the dim light of my apartment, the silence pressing in heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I felt small again, like the little girl who could never measure up, who was always reminded she wasn't enough. Their words still echoed. Selfish, unreasonable, unworthy. That old script tried to replay in my head. But then, another voice rose to the surface. My grandmother's. "Stand your ground, Cher. Never let anyone diminish your light." The sting of betrayal gave way to something sharper: resolve. I was a lawyer. I specialized in housing rights. I had fought for tenants facing slumlords, for families on the brink of eviction. If I could defend strangers against injustice, I could defend myself against my own blood. So I pushed aside the tears, cleared my kitchen table, and began to work. I pulled out every folder related to the house: the deed, the will, property tax receipts, insurance policies, maintenance records. I opened my laptop, scanning documents, sorting them into a digital folder, building a case file as if preparing for trial. Because in a way, I was. The opposing party wasn't a corporation or a landlord this time, it was my family. And I would treat them like any adversary who tried to take what wasn't theirs. By midnight, I had emailed Jackie, a colleague who specialized in estate law. I laid out the entire situation: my parents' demand, the threats, the 48-hour ultimatum. Within an hour, she responded. "They have no legal grounds. The will is airtight. But be careful, if they gain physical possession of the property, you'll be forced into a messy eviction process. Don't let them get a foot in the door." Her warning hit me hard. I pictured Stephanie strolling into the house with moving boxes, planting herself there under the guise of desperation. Legally, it would be chaos. And emotionally, it would be unbearable. No, I couldn't allow it. I started mapping out a timeline for the next 2 days, minute by minute. At 9 the next morning, I would call a locksmith to change every lock. By afternoon, I'd have a security system installed: cameras, alarms, remote access. Saturday evening, I'd gather my grandmother's most precious heirlooms: her wedding ring, the photo albums, the quilts, the recipe books. If my family was willing to break into my home, I wasn't going to let them lay hands on her treasures. I also prepared a cease and desist letter addressed to my parents and Stephanie, clearly stating my legal ownership and refusal to relinquish possession. I drafted an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, ready to file the moment the courthouse opened Monday morning. If they wanted a fight, I'd meet them head-on, armed with the law and my grandmother's will. But underneath the strategy, there was grief. I had spent years swallowing their cruelty, telling myself that's just what family did. That family was supposed to be complicated, that my role was to endure it. Yet here I was, facing proof that their love had always been conditional, that they valued control more than connection. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples, exhaustion pulling at me. But quitting wasn't an option. The weight of legacy sat on my shoulders, heavier than any case I'd ever carried. This was about more than property. It was about proving to myself that I was no longer the scapegoat they could push aside. The clock read 2 in the morning when I finally closed my laptop. My plan was clear. My resolve was iron. They thought they could bully me into surrender in 48 hours. But in truth, it would take them a lifetime to break me now. Saturday morning, the sky was pale with spring sunlight as I drove toward my grandmother's house. My trunk was filled with storage bins for heirlooms, and my chest throbbed with both anger and determination. The locksmith's van was already parked outside when I arrived at 9. He worked quickly, changing every external lock. I chose a keypad system for the front door, one I could control remotely. For the side and back doors, we used deadbolts with brand new keys. As I turned the first lock myself, I felt a strange surge of power. This was my house, and I was taking it back one bolt at a time. Not long after, a security company arrived. They installed cameras at every entry point, linked to an app on my phone. I tested each feed, watching the live footage flicker to life. If anyone tried to enter, I would know instantly. I even added smoke and carbon monoxide detectors tied to the system layers of protection I wished my grandmother had lived to see. While the technicians drilled and wired, I gathered my grandmother's treasures: her wedding ring, her pearl necklace, the quilt she stitched when I was born, the recipe books, pages stained with butter and sugar, each one filled with notes in her looping handwriting, the photo albums documenting generations of laughter, birthdays, quiet afternoons in the garden. Every item I placed gently into the storage bin felt like an act of defiance, a declaration: you will not erase her, and you will not erase me. By late afternoon, the house was secured, the cameras live, and my heart steadier than it had been in days. That's when my phone buzzed. Stephanie. Her message read, "Thinking of coming by tomorrow to measure for curtains and furniture. Would 9 work?" My blood ran hot. She spoke as if the decision was settled, as if I were merely a guest in my own home. I typed back, "We need to discuss this before any plans are made." Her reply came fast, sharp. "What is there to discuss? Mom and Dad already told you what's happening. I need the house, you don't. Simple." I could almost hear her smug tone. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Nothing about this is simple, Stephanie. The house is legally mine. Grandma left it to me for a reason." Her mask slipped. "Only because you were her favorite. And now you're going to deny my daughter a home out of spite? Real mature, Cher." I stared at the screen, anger and sadness colliding inside me. This wasn't about favoritism. This was about respect for my grandmother's wishes, for the law, for myself. I typed back, "This isn't about spite. It's about honoring Grandma and the truth. You can't just take someone's house because you want it." Her response was a single line: "Watch me." I set the phone down, my hands trembling. For years I had endured being cast as selfish, cold, difficult. But this was different. This was theft wrapped in entitlement, manipulation disguised as family duty. And for the first time, I felt no urge to argue, no temptation to explain myself into exhaustion. I felt only resolve. The house was mine. It would stay mine. And no amount of bullying texts or empty threats would change that. But let me ask you, what would you do if your own sister told you she was moving into your house against your will? Would you fight? Would you give in? Or would you, like me, finally draw a line in the sand? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if you would have had the strength to stand where I stood. Because this was the moment I realized the real battle wasn't about 4 walls and a roof. It was about reclaiming my voice. And I was just getting started. Saturday evening, I thought the storm might quiet down. The locks were changed, the security system was live, and my grandmother's keepsakes were safe in bins stacked neatly in the back of my car. For a brief hour, I let myself breathe. But then the buzzing began. First came Stephanie's barrage of texts. Photos of furniture, screenshots of sage green paint colors, messages like, thinking of using Grandma's dining room for Amanda's play area. And, do you still want the china cabinet? Otherwise we'll sell it. Each message was a provocation, a deliberate jab. They spoke about my grandmother's treasures as if they already belonged to them, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to be cleared out of the way. I refused to respond. Engaging would only dignify their entitlement. By 8 o'clock my phone rang again. My mother. I ignored it. She called again, and again. On the third attempt, I answered. "Why aren't you responding to your sister's messages?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Hello to you too, Mom," I said evenly. "I don't have anything to say to Stephanie about the house." "Don't be childish, Cher. The least you can do is cooperate. Stephanie needs your help with planning the move." "There isn't going to be a move," I replied firmly. "The house is mine. I have no intention of giving it to her." Silence, then a scoff. "So you're going to fight us on this, after everything we've done for you?" The irony nearly made me laugh. They hadn't paid for my law school. They hadn't supported my career. Every milestone I had carried alone. "I'm not fighting anyone," I said. "I'm stating a fact. The house is mine legally and rightfully." My mother's tone turned cold. "Your father wants to speak with you." And just like that my father's voice filled the line, deep and commanding. "Cher, I've spoken with Martin. There's precedent for contesting the will. Your grandmother wasn't in her right mind in her final months." Rage surged through me. "That's absolutely false. She was sharp until the end. Any doctor, any friend, any bridge partner would testify to that. You're threatening to slander her memory to get your way? That's low even for you." "I'm telling you what will happen if you keep being unreasonable," he countered. "Do you want to drag this family into an expensive, humiliating legal battle? Is that really what you want?" For a moment, I let his words hang in the air. This was his weapon: fear. He'd used it on me my whole life. But now, I was not the scared little girl at his mercy. I was an attorney. I knew the law. And I knew the truth. "You seem to think I'm intimidated by legal proceedings," I said, steady as steel. "I'm not. I know exactly how this ends. And it won't go the way you think." Sunday morning brought the escalation I'd been bracing for. My phone buzzed with calls and texts from extended relatives, an aunt shaming me for abandoning family, a cousin telling me to do the right thing. It was clear my parents had launched a campaign, painting me as the villain who left my sister and her daughter homeless. By afternoon the storm arrived in person. My doorbell rang. On the security feed, I saw them, my parents, Stephanie, and little Amanda, standing on my apartment's porch. My chest tightened. They had brought a child. I buzzed them in. When they entered, my mother wore her usual mask of wounded disappointment. My father clutched a folder of dubious documents. And Stephanie had Amanda clutching her hand like a prop in a play. "Aunt Cher, are we going to live in the house with the big tree swing?" Amanda asked innocently, her eyes wide. My throat tightened, but I managed to smile. "Sweetheart, why don't you watch something on my tablet while the grown-ups talk?" She settled happily on the couch, leaving Stephanie glaring at me. "That was unnecessary," my sister hissed. "What's unnecessary," I said evenly, "is using a child as a shield." And at that moment I knew this wasn't just about property. This was about control, manipulation, and the cycle I was finally ready to break. The real war had begun. They stood in my living room as if they owned it. My father placed his folder on the counter, sliding out a sheaf of papers with practiced confidence. "We are not here to fight," he said, though his tone was laced with command. "We're here to find a reasonable solution for the family. Stephanie has nowhere to go, and this," he tapped the papers, "is our agreement." I didn't move to pick them up. "What agreement?" My mother leaned in, her voice dripping with condescension. "A temporary reassignment of the house, just until Stephanie gets back on her feet." Finally, I lifted the papers. No letterhead, no attorney's signature, just a jumble of words my father had likely typed in haste. "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on," I said, sliding it back. "And if Martin truly prepared these, he should know better. Attempting to defraud me of property would ruin him professionally." "You're threatening our family attorney now?" my mother gasped. I'm stating facts, I replied, my voice calm but sharp. Stephanie's mask cracked. You are unbelievable. You don't even use that house. You just keep it like some shrine because Grandma loved you best. Meanwhile, my daughter and I need a home. I looked at her, really looked. Entitlement radiated from every word, but beneath it desperation flickered. Still, that did not excuse this theft. This isn't about who Grandma loved more, I said. It's about respecting her wishes. The will is clear. The house belongs to me. Not you. Not Mom and Dad. Me. My father's face reddened. He pulled out another paper, sliding it across the counter. This is a notice of our intent to challenge the will. Martin has already begun the paperwork. I skimmed it, my stomach tightening with fury. No letterhead, no legal weight, just another bluff. I pushed it back across the counter. This is meaningless, and if Martin is truly involved, he'll be answering to the Bar Association. Because this is fraud. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Amanda humming softly on the couch, oblivious to the storm raging a few feet away. My mother's eyes glistened with tears, a tactic she'd used since I was a child to guilt me into surrender. My father's jaw clenched, used to being obeyed without question. Stephanie's glare could have cut glass. This isn't over, my father finally said, gathering the worthless papers. His voice carried the same authority he had used my whole life. Be prepared for what comes next. I stepped closer, standing tall though my heart pounded. I'm always prepared. Are you? For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, they turned. My father stiff, my mother on the verge of tears, Stephanie dragging Amanda by the hand. The door shut behind them, and silence filled the apartment. I leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. For the first time, I had faced them head-on, without flinching, without folding, and it had rattled them. I knew then there would be no peaceful compromise, no last-minute reconciliation. They were determined to take what wasn't theirs, and I was equally determined to stop them. The final 24 hours of their deadline had begun, but instead of dread, I felt something else rising inside me, strength. This was my house, my inheritance, my line in the sand, and no one, not even my family, would cross it. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of deceptive sunlight that made the world look calm even as storms brewed beneath the surface. I had taken the day off from work, knowing this would be no ordinary battle. My car was parked a short distance down the street from my grandmother's house, legal documents stacked neatly on the passenger seat, the deed, the will, the attorney's letter confirming my unconditional ownership. Most importantly, I held a freshly granted temporary restraining order. At 9:30 my phone buzzed. The security system app flashed. Motion detected. I opened the feed and there he was, my father, circling the property like a predator. He tugged on the door handles, tested the windows, his face twisted with frustration when they didn't budge. He made a phone call, gesturing wildly, pacing like the king of a kingdom suddenly denied entry. 20 minutes later, the rumble of a moving truck filled the quiet street. My mother's SUV pulled up behind it, Stephanie in the passenger seat. I watched as they climbed out, their body language sharp and clipped, voices raised in a heated argument. My sister marched to the front door, tried her old key, and froze when it didn't work. Her face hardened, and I knew. This was the moment. I texted my friend Thomas, the police officer who had promised to stand by me. They're here. It's time. I pulled my car into the driveway, blocking the moving truck from leaving. My family turned, startled, as I stepped out. My mother recovered first, sarcasm dripping from her lips. Finally decided to show up and do the right thing? I'm here, I said evenly, to make sure the right thing happens. Right on cue, Thomas's patrol car rolled to a stop, his partner Rivera stepping out beside him. Professional, steady, giving no hint that Thomas and I were friends. What's going on here? My father barked, puffing himself up as if sheer authority would bend the situation to his will. Miss Warren asked us to be present during a potential trespassing attempt, Thomas replied. Rivera held the folder of documentation I had provided. Stephanie scoffed. Trespassing? We're family. This is our house too. Rivera's voice was firm. This property belongs to Miss Warren. She has not granted permission for anyone else to enter. Any attempt would be trespassing. This is ridiculous, my mother sputtered, her face flushed. Cher, call them off. This is family business. I looked at her. Steady. Number, this is attempted theft. And I've already filed for a restraining order, which means if you step onto this property, there will be legal consequences. I handed each of them a copy of the order. Watching their eyes scan the papers, watching disbelief turn to rage, it was almost surreal. Stephanie's voice rose, shrill. You got a restraining order against your own family? Have you lost your mind? On the contrary, I said. I've never been clearer. This house is mine. Grandma left it to me. You cannot move in. Not today. Not ever. My father's jaw clenched, his voice low and dangerous. This won't stand. Martin is preparing paperwork to contest the will. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, already cued to a recording I had made that morning. Interesting, I said, because I spoke with Martin myself. Would you like to hear what he actually said? Their eyes flickered with doubt. I pressed play. For the record, I never advised the Warren family that there were grounds to contest Elaine Warren's will. The will is legally sound. Cher Warren is the sole and rightful owner of the property. I have not prepared, nor will I prepare, any documents challenging this fact. The color drained from my father's face. My mother turned to him, stunned. Stephanie froze, the truth finally cracking the illusion she had clung to. And here, dear listener, is where everything began to shift. What happened in the minutes that followed would not only end this battle, but also expose just how deep the betrayal had run. Stay with me, because the next revelation shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The recording ended, and silence blanketed the street. My father's confidence drained from his face, leaving only fury. My mother looked between us, bewildered, as though the ground beneath her feet had vanished. Stephanie's eyes were wide, her mouth half open, unable to form words. You lied? My mother finally whispered to my father. Martin never said we could contest the will? My father's jaw tightened. He was being cautious. There are always other attorneys who would take the case. I shook my head, my voice steady. No reputable attorney would. The will is ironclad. Grandma was of sound mind, the documents were properly executed, and there are no conditions for transfer. This has been nothing but a manipulation. And now, thanks to Martin's statement, there's proof. Stephanie's bravado cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she gestured toward the moving truck. Amanda and I have nowhere to go. We gave up our apartment. All our things are here. What are we supposed to do? Her words pricked at my heart, but I stayed firm. You have options, Stephanie. There are rentals, short-term leases, support programs. I'll even help you with resources if you want. But this house is not one of those options. My mother snapped back to life, her voice trembling with outrage. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By humiliating us in front of police, leaving your sister and niece homeless? I looked at her directly. They are not homeless because of me. They are homeless because you promised them something that was never yours to give. You created this situation, not me. For a brief moment, I saw something shift in Stephanie. Her tears slowed, her gaze flickering as if she were beginning to question the story she'd been told. But my father cut in, pulling her back into their orbit. Enough, he barked. We're leaving. This isn't the time or place. Thomas and Rivera stepped forward, their presence steady and unyielding. Rivera spoke clearly, his tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. For clarity, the restraining order prohibits you from entering this property without Miss Warren's written consent. Any violation will result in immediate legal consequences. My father stiffened, his authority undercut. We understand. He turned to Stephanie and my mother. Come on. As they shuffled toward the SUV, the moving truck following behind, I stood in the driveway watching them disappear. Relief coursed through me, but it was laced with sorrow. This confrontation hadn't just revealed their willingness to lie, it had shattered the last illusions I'd clung to about what family meant. Later that week, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Martin emailed me directly. Out of professional obligation, he forwarded past communications from my parents. They hadn't concocted this plan after Stephanie's divorce. They had been plotting from the moment my grandmother passed away 3 years ago. One email from my father to another attorney cut me like glass. The house has been in our family for generations. My mother's decision to leave it to Cher was short-sighted and emotional. We need to correct this mistake. Correct this mistake. That was how he described my grandmother's love for me. That was how he described her final act of faith in my life. Reading those words, I realized something undeniable. This had never been about Stephanie's needs. It had never been about Amanda's future. It had always been about control. About my parents' refusal to accept that my grandmother had chosen me over their authority. For years, I thought if I worked harder, achieved more, bent myself into the shape they wanted, they would finally see me. Finally love me. But that night, staring at those emails, I understood the truth. Nothing I did would ever be enough. Their love was conditional, tied to obedience, and I had broken the rules simply by living my own life. I closed my laptop, the glow of the screen fading into darkness. The betrayal was deep, but strangely, I felt lighter. Their scheme had been exposed, their lies unraveled. And I was free to stop chasing their approval, free to honor my grandmother's legacy on my own terms. The battle for the house had revealed more than just greed. It had revealed the truth about my family, and once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. In the weeks that followed, I felt as if I were walking through two parallel worlds. On one side was the storm my family had created: calls, texts, guilt-laden messages from relatives who barely knew me but suddenly felt entitled to judge. On the other side was a quieter, slower world inside my grandmother's house. That world was where I chose to live. At first, the silence inside those walls was painful. I had defended myself, won the legal battle, and kept the house. But the victory was laced with grief. For years I had told myself that family was complicated but worth preserving. Now I had to admit something I never wanted to. Sometimes, family is the wound. So I sought help. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma. She listened as I recounted the betrayal, the favoritism, the manipulation. She gave me words for what I had endured: scapegoat, golden child, narcissistic family system. For the first time, the patterns were visible. I could see clearly that the problem had never been me. It had always been them. One day in session, my therapist leaned forward and said softly, "Your grandmother seems to have been the one healthy influence in your life. By defending her gift, you are honoring her love and your own worth." Those words hit me like a bell. Yes, that was exactly it. By refusing to surrender the house, I wasn't clinging to bricks. I was holding on to the one relationship in my family that had been real, unconditional, and true. With each passing week, I began to root myself deeper into the house. I sold my downtown apartment and moved in permanently. The commute was longer, but it felt like a small price to pay for peace. I refinished the hardwood floors, uncovering the rich glow hidden under decades of carpet. I painted the sunroom a warm yellow so the morning light spilled across the walls. In the kitchen, I kept the vintage cabinets my grandmother adored, but added modern touches of my own. The garden became my sanctuary. Following her old garden journal, I replanted peonies, daisies, and vegetables. On my knees in the soil, I felt closer to her than ever before. Watching green shoots break through the ground was like watching myself heal slowly, stubbornly, in defiance of the cold seasons that had tried to bury me. I didn't isolate myself either. I invited colleagues over for dinner, cooking in the same kitchen where my grandmother once pulled pies from the oven. I joined the local historical society she had been part of, listening to neighbors share stories of the neighborhood's past. One evening, my next-door neighbor, a woman in her 70s, brought me a casserole and said, "Elaine would be proud of you. She always said you were the strong one." That simple sentence nearly brought me to tears. In time, I even found a way to give back. I started a scholarship in my grandmother's name, the Elaine Warren Resilience Scholarship for law students who came from fractured families, just as I had. It wasn't large, but it was meaningful, a way to extend her love forward. Of course, my parents didn't disappear. My mother tried to erase the past with casual invitations. Come to Sunday dinner. Let's put this behind us. As if betrayal could be smoothed over with pot roast. My father sent one last letter, thinly veiled threats of legal action. I responded with the emails Martin had given me, exposing their scheme. That was the end of his threats. Stephanie, though, surprised me. Months later, she wrote a letter genuine, regretful, apologizing for her part in it. She admitted she had been swept up in our parents' manipulation, that my refusal to cave had forced her to see the truth. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. 6 months after the confrontation, I stood in the garden at sunset, the house glowing behind me, peonies swaying in the breeze. For the first time in my life, I felt safe, whole, rooted. I realized then, family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes, family is the legacy of love someone leaves you. Sometimes, it is the community you choose, the neighbors who welcome you, the friends who stand beside you. And in protecting this house, I had finally learned how to protect myself. 6 months later, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. The hardwood floors gleamed, the sunroom glowed golden in the morning light, and the garden bloomed in colors so vivid they almost hurt my eyes. That spring, I decided to host a garden party, something my grandmother would have loved. Neighbors came, carrying casseroles and pies. Colleagues from my law office arrived, curious to see the place I had defended so fiercely. Laughter echoed across the lawn, children darted between the flower beds, and the scent of peonies hung in the warm evening air. Standing on the porch, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: community. Belonging. I moved among my guests, telling them the history of the house, sharing stories of my grandmother's wisdom. One colleague asked, "Was it worth it? All that conflict, all that pain?" I looked around at the glowing faces, the home restored, the legacy intact. My answer came easily. Every second. Later, as twilight painted the sky in soft purples, I sat on the porch swing alone. The creak of the chains was familiar, almost like a lullaby. I thought of my grandmother, of how fiercely she had believed in me. I whispered into the night, "I stood my ground, Grandma. I honored you." For a moment, I could almost hear her laugh in the breeze, see her nodding in approval. The phone buzzed in my pocket, another message from a relative trying to drag me back into guilt. I turned it off. For once, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Boundaries were not cruelty. They were protection. And sometimes, saying no was the most loving act you could give yourself. It struck me then. I had not just defended a house. I had defended my freedom, my right to exist outside my parents' control, my right to define family on my own terms. That realization was more valuable than any inheritance. As the stars emerged overhead, I let myself imagine the future. More dinners with neighbors, more nights on the porch swing, maybe even children of my own one day, learning to plant peonies in the soil my grandmother once tilled. The thought filled me with peace. I knew my parents would never truly change. Their attempts at manipulation would return in waves, sometimes disguised as kindness, sometimes as threats. But I was not afraid anymore. The cycle was broken. I had chosen myself. And now, dear listener, I want to ask you, have you ever had to draw a boundary so firm that it risked breaking family ties? Did you walk away? Or did you fight? Share your story in the comments, because stories like these remind us we are not alone. And if you want to hear more about how standing up for yourself can change everything, make sure you subscribe and join me for the next video. Because this story doesn't end here. It's just the beginning of living free. The night after the garden party, I lingered outside long after the last guest had gone home. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Lanterns glowed softly on the porch, casting warm light across the yard where laughter had filled the air only hours earlier. I sat on the old swing, its wooden seat smooth from generations before me, and let the stillness wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next call, the next demand, the next crisis. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I simply breathed, and the silence felt like a gift. In that moment, I realized healing isn't about erasing the pain, it's about planting something stronger in its place. The house had taught me that. Boundaries had taught me that. My grandmother's faith in me had taught me that. I thought of her garden, now blooming under my hands, and understood that every seed I planted was more than a flower. It was a reminder that life continues, that love can outlast betrayal, that roots can deepen even after storms. This house is no longer a symbol of conflict. It's a sanctuary, a place where I honor her legacy, but also where I write my own. And as I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the trees, I promised myself one last thing. I will never again shrink to fit someone else's story. I will live mine fully, freely, and with peace.